We'll wait a couple more minutes to see if we have to give more participants to log in, and then we'll start. I can see the participants number is increasing very fast, so we'll start in a minute. Okay, I think we're ready. So hi everyone, welcome to Collecting the Now. My name is Emma Ziraldo and I am the NEH Preventive Conservation Fellow at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. I'm here with my colleague Stephanie Schwartz-Bailey, Education Program Manager and Preservation Consultant. We're pleased to host a live presentation and conversation today with guest Danielle Kuijten, co-curator at Imagine IC. This program is provided with generous support from the National Endowment of the Humanities and the William Penn Foundation. We'll begin the session with a quick poll to let us know from where you're joining in. So also feel free, as somebody has already started, nice, to communicate from what part of the world you're sitting in now by typing that in the chat box. You will have another chance to join the conversation across the many borders that geographically divide us after Danielle's presentation. That is, Danielle will answer questions that are posed in the chat box, and Stephanie will moderate the comments placed there. So let's wait a little bit to give you time to fill in the poll, and then we can see the results. Do we already have the results here? Great. So we have a lot of participants, 30%, most of you, I would say, from museums. But we also have an 18% from library, 15% from archives, 24% from college and university. And then another group of professionals from different institutions. Great. So today we will learn about preserving community through collections. Obviously, our communities are various, yet the motivation that encourages us to collect, preserve, exhibit, and engage with cultural heritage are not unique to the country, region, or even neighborhood in which we sit in front of our screens. So let's explore the similarities and the differences to our preservation success and the challenges in collecting the now. And now welcome Danielle Kuijten, co-curator at Imagine IC. Imagine IC is the first cultural organization in the Netherlands to highlight the culture and identity of migrants as seen as their own perspective. Imagine IC documents, presents, and discusses daily life in the neighborhood and the city with the aim of complementing the heritage of the city and the country. Imagine IC is a pioneer in the heritage of current living together. So Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emma. So now first,
let me stop share my screen. Okay.
Okay, now I have to quickly find my mouse again. To put on my slideshow. There we go. Well, thank you so much, Emma, for this kind introduction, and also thank you to Stephanie and for this kind invitation to present a little bit about my work today. You already said a little bit of it, so and we want to tackle quite a lot in this hour, so let me just start. So my name is Danielle Kuijten, I'm co-curator at Imagine IC. And we are actually based in the outskirts of Amsterdam, and we share our house with the public library there. Imagine IC started about 20 years ago. And this outskirt of Amsterdam, just to give you a little bit of sense of where we are based, this area used to be just a rural area, but in the 50s, Amsterdam wanted to expand. And it was actually used to develop an Ethiopian concept of modernistic lifestyles. But pretty soon in the 70s, it actually became a very diverse, after the independence of Suriname, but also by the arrival of many other, what they called New Dutch migrants from all over the world. The whole sense of this part of town actually developed in a different dynamic. So where it used to be developed for middle and higher class families, it became way more mixed, as we now call like a super diverse urban district. Imagine IC, when it started 20 years ago, it was actually as an answer to what was lacking in the big archives and in the collections. So people felt that what was represented there was very one-sided. As we say today, very white, very institutional, while society was already so much more diverse. But a lot of these voices were not represented in the collections. So when Imagine IC started, we actually started with first oral history interviews by...
Danielle?
Yes?
Excuse me, is your screen shared with us at the moment?
Yes.
Let's take just a minute to make sure that Emma's screen share is off and that yours is on, because I and some of the participants are only seeing a black screen.
Oh no.
And we can't see your beautiful slides. Ah, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, but then this is now just me logging off.
But we can see the slide now. Stephanie, do you still see my shared screen?
I do not see your screen. That was only...
You should. Yeah. Okay.
I see, Danielle, I see your main slides as well as your feed of slides on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just stopping my my presentation just to see what is happening. So I will see if I can put it back. Do you see it now?
Now we see only a black screen.
So Emma, did you switch off your share?
I did. Because I've tried to type now again, and it's on the share screen button, and now it says that if I type that, everybody will stop sharing. Let me try that, and then we'll see what happens from there. So it's probably better than a black screen. Okay.
Yes.
I'm still not in, like it wasn't my screen shared.
Leah, can you weigh in with any advice here for Emma and Danielle?
Are we in now?
Yes.
Perfect. It looks perfect now with your beautiful images and collecting the now. Yeah.
Okay. Recap very fast then.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Yes, no, it's so sorry for the people that have been looking at a black screen for and hearing me talking, because it is always working better if you have a visual in front of you to get a little bit of context. So I was explaining that we are based at the outskirts of Amsterdam, and we share the house with the public library there. And this district is developed in the 50s. Before, it was actually just a rural area, which was not part of Amsterdam. But when Amsterdam wanted to expand in the 50s, they started to take on that part of land and started to develop basically a utopian modernistic neighborhood. And ever since, it has been developing, and it is actually now a super diverse neighborhood where a lot of newcomers, when they come and move to Amsterdam, they like to live in the Bijlmer because it's so diverse, so it feels easily at home. And this is where we started to work 20 years ago. What I was saying, where like the collections that were in the institutions and in the archives were very one-sided. And also the Dutch government was actually warning for a monoculture. So they wanted to invest in institutions and initiatives that would actually look at how society was at that moment and see how to engage more different voices in that. And interesting enough, this is actually something that 20 years down the line, we are still discussing all together. So how can we become more multifocal in our collections, in our work, in the museums, in the archives? And the first projects that we did were basically oral history interviews with migrants, first generation migrants, either migrants that came to the Netherlands from former colonies, but also workers, migrants. And we started to show them how they were represented in these collections and then asked them to tell the story from their side. And that way we started to annotate collections, both in archives and in museums. So just briefly, if I want to go back now to, and now it's all running. So what Imagine&See is about, we always say we want to activate, critically reflect and update. So we want to discuss together with the people in the neighborhood. We work in a participatory way. So we connect with the different communities that are living in our part of town. And we negotiate with them the concept of heritage. So if we talk about heritage, what does that mean for them? And do they feel that they connect what is presented as heritage in archives and in museums? And in that, we also research in the process of meaning making. So how does it work? So when do we apply significance to something on a more individual or more personal level? And by doing that and by collecting these different, not only voices, but also different objects that come out of all these talks, we hope that we can also update local and national collections. And in that way, create a space and perspectives for a more diverse people to act upon ownership, but also a sense of belonging. And all of this is connected to new concepts of collecting methodologies, and this is something that I will go on a little bit deeper. So Imagine IC actually operates in two levels, or in a circle maybe. So on one hand, we work with the neighborhood, and we work with the people in the neighborhood talking about heritage and collecting what they feel is their heritage and what gives them a sense of belonging. But by doing that, we also constantly rethink about what methodologies are we using, how do we do that in an ethical way, and what do we learn from that, and what the outcomes of that we actually share with our colleagues in the field. So in 2014, we started with something new, which is called the Neighborhood Archive. So up till then, we had done all kinds of different projects. And we also did a lot of youth projects about youth culture and their heritage. But in 2014, we were asked by the city district to develop a more museum or archive style of setup with collected stories. And this is what we call the Neighborhood Archive, which is a showcase of Southeast. And in here, we bring in together objects that are on loan from the people from the neighborhood. Archival material is in the drawers from organizations, but also private archives from people in the neighborhood. And all of these materials we have, as said, on loan. So when we refurbish this exhibition, they go back. For us, it's very important that we identify what is there, but not necessarily that we want to acquire everything. As part of the conversation, also in what I will talk later on a little bit more, the co-collection lab is also, are some objects better off maybe left with the people while they're still using it, because that way it's still gaining meaning and significance. And then whenever we want to tell a story, we can bring it out and connect it with other objects and do it like that. But then at least we know where the objects are. And the same as we work actually with the archives. So we identify where the archives are, and we discuss with the people whether they still want to work and keep it with them, or whether in time they maybe want to transfer it to an archive. If they have interest in transferring it to an archive, then we have a cooperation with the City Archive of Amsterdam, and then we work together with them on how best to disclose this material. So as said, we do that with the neighborhood, and whenever we create exhibitions, we always create conversations about it as well. So meaning making is for us a constant process, and heritage making as well. So for us, heritage are those items, whether it's a ritual or it's archival material or it's a museum object or a monument that that people connect to, and that people either feel very happy or sad or any emotion in between about, but it does something to them. If an object doesn't do anything to anybody, is it then still heritage? Well, that is something that we are asking actually in conversations, both with the participants, but also in our educational program. So as I already mentioned, the co-collection lab is part of our work. We work with a lot of different partners in the city. We work with museums like the Trophy Museum, which is an ethnographical museum. The Amsterdam Museum is the city museum, but also with the city archive. And with them, we see how we can connect stories that are urgent in our neighborhood, and how can we connect these urgencies to their collections, and how can we update their collections, but also add new objects or new archival material to it. Within the co-collection lab, we actually discuss different topics, and they concern identification. As said, for us, our core goal is not to acquire, but it's to identify what is there, what is out there, and what is relevant. It's about meaning making. So how does meaning making process work? And how can we keep meaning making also active with those objects and archives that are in depots, so that it stays active. It concerns matters of authority, ownership, authenticity, and accessibility. So I will actually present now two projects that we presented to dig a little bit deeper in how our work goes, how the process is basically. One is the Bijlmer disaster. In '92, we had a huge disaster in the Bijlmer where an Israeli plane crashed into a couple of high-rise buildings. This was one of the first and still one of the biggest disasters in the Netherlands after World War II. But at that time, the Bijlmer was known as a no-go area, and especially the aftermath of this disaster was very much felt by the people that lived there, that it was not taken serious. It was only happening in the Bijlmer, and that was a no-go area anyway. So even 25 years down the road of this disaster, people still felt they had not found closure. And they had collected all kinds of materials about it to keep it alive. And they felt the urgency to get national recognition. So they came to us and said, this year it's 25 years ago, and we want to work with you on bringing those urgencies that we feel to the public, to the wider public, and maybe even to the national public. So we started with having what we always do when we start a topic. We invite people from our network to share their stories and to see whether they have material in connection to the topic. And these gatherings are not only for us to see and identify what is there, but it's often also, it has a very social setup. So it's also for the people to meet each other and to find common ground in certain urgencies. And based from those gatherings, these were all kinds of objects that came above. And it was quite interesting. There were people that said, I kept a box with materials in relation to a disaster, but I didn't open that box for 25 years. But now, because you're here, I'm willing to open up again and to go through that emotion again. So from these materials, we created an exhibition, but we also wanted to connect and appeal to this question about national acknowledgement. So because it was 25 years, part of the archives became publicly open. So I went to the National Archive to see what they had in their archives, to if there was any material that we could show in the exhibition. And because of the type of disaster, a part is actually still closed, so and probably will never become available for the greater public. But part of the minutes of the government did become public. And in first instance, the National Archive, because they have very strict rules on loans. And as I said in the beginning, we are based in a public library. For us, climate and all these kinds of facilities are actually not there. So in first instance, they said, well, your location is not suitable and you are not able to get anything in original on loan. But then I kept on having the discussion with them, and I said, this is of great importance for this neighborhood. And I feel that I cannot come back and say, well, we got something from the public library, but we can only have basically a copy. And at the end, they actually agreed that we would have the original, because they said it is so important for that neighborhood that we will have different rules for the loan on this. And what we did is I put a temperature and a humidity meter in the drawer where it was. So it was, when the drawer was closed, it was in dark, and I kept on monitoring the circumstances, but at least we were able that way to have the originals shown in the district. That was, and this was very important for the people that had lived through that disaster and were still feeling the consequences of that disaster. So after we had a big opening, and we connected it also afterwards with a lot of talks in the neighborhood and a lot of aftercare as well, because of course we asked them to open up in some cases a wound, or open up their boxes with all their memories. So we also felt that we had to take care of the whole period afterwards. So we had a lot of different smaller sessions where people could meet and share with us their feelings. But we also arranged a television series with portraits, because one of the other urgencies or feelings they had, it was never recognized as something national, and they wanted this story to be presented on national television. And this series of interviews was actually quite successful, and we also brought it as a program in-house, and had also discussions in-house with the people in the neighborhood and the filmmakers, and also talking about, again, also the ethics of how do you represent in a case like that, in interviews, stories like this. Another project that I would like to share with you is a project which is called Ghana at Home. And Ghana at Home is a project that we did together with the Trophy Museum. And we actually invited people from our neighborhood, especially people with Ghanaian backgrounds, but there were also a lot of Surinamese people that felt or feel connected to Ghana because of the historical connections that participated in this. And we had the question, how do you create a sense of Ghana at home? What kind of objects do you use, or what kind of rituals do you use to do that? But we also showed them a list of objects that were in the Trophy Museum in the collection. And we also asked them to select 3 objects that connected for them to the sense of home. And what they collected, the Trophy Museum got out of the depot into a special room, and we organized a gathering where the participants could see the objects that they selected in real. They could even touch it. And the interesting thing with this exercise was as well, the conservation of the Africa collection was there. And we said to her, this meeting, this gathering is not about the knowledge that is with the museum, but this is about the knowledge that these people will bring in on the objects. So this is for us an exercise in listening. And it's always interesting because of course we all love to share what we know, the knowledge that we have, and listening in case it's harder, and especially if it comes to what is truth, what is fact, what is not. But for us, this was about what are the emotional connections to the objects as well, and how do these people remember or use these objects. One of the objects that was selected was a canoe, but this object was not stored in the depot. So we were not able to actually have this canoe in the discussion day with the other objects. But this canoe was actually on the list of, I would not say disposed, but it was not going to, it had never been in an exhibition, and the chances that it would ever be part of an exhibition was very slim. And that actually started a conversation between me and the collection manager of the Tropen Museum, what to do with an object like that, where it's obvious that it has meaning to people, but there's not an opportunity to show it within the museum. Would it be an opportunity then to give it a space in our house at Imagine IC in the Bijlmer? But before doing that, we wanted to see whether more people had a connection to the canoe. So we organized a meeting with all kinds of participants and saying, so we have this canoe, and Stephanie, one of the participants, has selected this object and said, this is very important for me to connect to, and for me this represents a sense of home, because it brings it back to when I visit my family in Ghana, and it's all about getting the food, and it's all about the gathering, so it's very important. And then we started during that meeting to see and collect different meanings of all the different participants. And then we noticed actually that it was not only an important object for Stephanie that to connect to, but it was also very important for a lot of other participants, and they all had different stories and different connections to that. And because we noticed that there was actually that was a broad group that felt that this object was important, we actually moved on with the discussion with the collection manager in the Tropen Museum and say, so if this object is so important, is it then possible to place it in the library and in our house? So this was a smaller exhibition with a smaller object from what the participants had collected, and there was an image of the canoe, and you could listen the audio of Stephanie telling why it was so important to her. But because of all the different interests and all the different meanings, we decided, or at least I already wanted it, but of course it was not up to me because the canoe was not part of our collection. The Tropen Museum granted us for 10 years a loan to have the canoe in-house. And on the pictures in the top you see it's hung from the ceiling, and we have on one side where you see the books and the pictures, that is actually a big stair, so then you walk underneath the canoe, and then on the other side, which is the smaller, there are working spaces, so people can sit and work there and they look straight, they can almost touch the canoe. And these are for me, both the discussion with the National Archive and with the Tropen Museum are also very important discussions in the co-collection lab, because they go about how do we decide when an object can be shown where, and of course there's all these things. We want to preserve things the best that we can, but sometimes I wonder, how does the importance for the generations today balance against the generations of the future? So can we find ways where not everything needs to be kept and saved for eternity, but based on importance, rethink the processes that we have created together to work with? Then I think I've been already talking for quite, I will quickly close with one last project that we did most recently. This is about a parking garage, and you can say, a parking garage, why is this heritage? And this parking garage is part of the original design of the utopian modernistic development in the Bijlmer. But in the 80s, a lot of these high-rise buildings and parking garages were actually torn down to be replaced with lower buildings, because the high-rise buildings created not the safe sense that people wanted for their living environments. So the whole area was redeveloped, actually. And this parking garage is a garage that is one of the last ones standing, basically. And there's also a church in. The Bijlmer was developed in a time where in the Netherlands we were thinking people are not going to the church anymore. So this whole area was developed without spaces for houses of prayer. But with the whole dynamics of that area changing, a lot of different religions actually arrived in this district. And they started to take and create their own spaces to have their gatherings. And one of the spaces that was used quite a lot are spaces that were designed within the parking garages, because the original parking garages had not only space to put your car, but there were also some collective spaces in there. So in this specific garage, there's a Pentecostal church that is already there for many years. And this garage has many layers and has gone through many transformations, but was actually on the list of being demolished. But there was a big group of people that was against the demolishment of the parking garage. And we were triggered by the idea, so how can we, one, how does it work? How does something become a monument? What are the tick boxes that are used for that? How can we make that more participative in a way? And on the other side, if something really has to go, then different ways of creating maybe a monument of the mind with this. And in the last months, what we have been doing is together with the city district that invited us to do this whole trajectory, we visited the garages a couple of times and we asked the people, if you want to keep anything from this garage, what would it be? So what should be maybe musealized, or what should be transformed in something else? Or are there any conceptual ideas that you see in the garage that were part of the whole design that you would like to return in the new building that will come after this? So we went through that whole process with the people from the neighborhood, with former users of that parking garage, because the parking garage was also used to sport. Parties were giving their some of the best graffiti of the Bijlmer could be seen there. And at the end, as I speak today, the garage has been demolished, but in the meantime, we have collected both objects. We created a 3D film, and we created a book with the graffiti to basically create a monument of the mind, where even when now that the building, the garage is gone, there are different ways to keep on telling this story. And it has been a really interesting process to do this also together with the district, because they were very, the building is not good anymore, and it's not safe anymore, and it should go. But it's interesting that they have been somehow infected by the way that we have approached it, and they actually invited it to participate in more projects in the neighborhood, where then the connection between the people in the neighborhood and the relation they have with their lived environment finds also a way and a translation in decisions that are making in the city district and in policy making. I feel that I've been talking so much. I have a sore throat of talking. So I think I would leave it at this. I thank you for listening to me, and I'm actually looking forward to your questions, and I hope I made some sense in what I tried to tell you. It's always hard. I love my job, so I can easily fill 3 hours talking about it. But I think we should leave it at this.
Thank you, Danielle, so much for your engaging and inspiring presentation. I think we have a lot of points that we can go through. So I will now invite Stephanie to pose some questions from the audience for your response. So you can go from there.
Thank you, Emma. And thank you, Danielle, so much for sharing your projects with us. Your work is so engaging and so significant. And I'm so happy that we could have this webinar as a platform to learn about your projects. I noticed that folks have joined us from the West Coast of the United States, the Midwest, the East Coast, Europe, and even farther into the Middle East. So you really are serving as a bridge today between communities, collected communities via our laptops, and those of us who are really enjoying learning about some of the successes and challenges and considerations that you give to your work. So I am going to scroll through the chat box a bit and look for some questions to pose to you. But while I do that, may I start with a question?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, so I am so impressed by how much dialogue is a part of your work. And I think maybe even to a point, sometimes the collecting is prompted by a lot of dialogue with various communities and your staff and neighborhood representatives. Can you tell us a little bit more about how those dialogues start and what they're like to be a part of, and what potential hurdles can come up during those initial conversations?
Well, we have a very small team, so we work with about 7 people, and one of the core positions is actually the position of my colleague Jules Rijssen, and he's what we call our network connector. I think in general terms you would say the outreach officer or something similar like that. But he is actually constantly out there going to the churches and going to the neighborhood houses, going to the street to talk to people and see what are topics that are important for them. And this actually feeds then themes that we see, and then we pick themes from that. And then we start inviting these people in our network to come for what we say just roundtable sessions. So I just briefly showed a picture from the Bijlmer disaster. So then we just have we sit in a big circle and we share stories. And often Jules has then already talked to a lot of people individually as well. So he knows which stories are where, because you also need that, because some people, of course, feel easier to talk in a bigger group and some feel less. So then he can guide them through that to get most out of the conversation. And from there, we have also a lot of one-on-ones or smaller group conversations. And from there, that also then immediately prompts people with saying, but I have material on that as well. And you will get a shift. So there are people that want to participate in the joint sessions, but not necessarily then want to either bring in their story for an exhibition or bring that further, but they just want to be part of the whole. And then you will have the people that say, well, I have something to bring in, and or I would love to share my personal story, and you can record it. And from there we create then exhibitions, and we always say that the exhibitions that we create are just a moment in time where we show what we have collected so far. So they're never the end product. So they're somewhere in the middle of the process, and then the exhibition is used again to engage into further discussions about the difficulties in some cases of certain heritage. Where are the pain? Where is it rubbing? Where are we disagreeing with each other? And then sometimes more material comes from that as well. And what you also see is that we somehow have then meta lines of themes that will come back 2 years later again, and then we revisit also the previous. So we keep on tapping back also in what we have collected and what we are collecting now.
Oh, that's interesting. So the process becomes very multidimensional.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a question in the chat box that addresses sort of the next step after some of these dialogues, conversations, and exhibition planning, which is, I'm just going to read the question. I love the idea of a loan-generated exhibit, but I admit that I'm intimidated by the paperwork and the fear that we would wind up with the items that people never come back to retrieve after an exhibition. Are there ways that you have streamlined the process or ensured the retrieval process?
Well, we actually never ended up with material that people didn't pick up. So maybe that's just also luck.
Yeah.
We do have some archival material that is actually with us, but it's in transition. So they can keep it with us, but they're preparing together with the City Archive to prepare it to go to the City Archive. So we are just a middle station. And what we do is, be interesting enough, often the objects only come like a week before I have the opening. So you need a good sturdy stomach and not to get nervous, because from participation things will come late. It takes time and it will come late. But then we take the objects in, we take pictures, and they sign a form. And then the minute the exhibition is over, we call them again and say, we packaged everything, and they sign it going out, and they go back. And Jules even goes with the objects to bring them to people in the neighborhood. And you have to remember, of course, it's not the minute things enter with us, then we don't put on the white gloves and say, and now it's something different. So we have a different approach, and I'm very aware that for a lot of institutions, it's not possible to completely work in this way. But I hope that then the ways we are thinking just spike little things that can be changed in working. So therefore, then my colleague Jewel just packs things up because people are bringing things just in plastic bags and then they returned in plastic bags. But we also have, for instance, a costume in our exhibition, which is from a theater. It's a Winti costume. It's about the Winti religion. And whenever the show is back on stage, they come and pick the costume up. And it's used in the theater, and then we will have a little note in the showcase saying, "You can see me now, active in the theater." And then when it's finished, they bring the object back to us. So we have a different approach on how we deal with the objects.
Do you ever find yourself in a circumstance where you offer or present guidelines for preservation when the object is returned to its original owner, where of course the conditions are not ideal, like in a museum?
I don't do that personally because I'm a museologist, but I do have within the co-collection lab, I work with a lot of people that do have that knowledge. So whenever people are asking for guidance on that, we connect them. And then we make that bridge. And therefore we had, last year we had a beautiful exhibition with textiles. And some people had like really old textiles, but they really want to keep that. But they are wondering how they could take better care of it because they didn't have the knowledge how to. And then I connect them with people from the museum, from the textile department to advise them on that.
That addresses another question that's in the chat box. One of the participants is wondering, how do you educate yourself in terms of caring for objects that seem ephemeral or difficult to preserve in a traditional way, but maybe some of your co-staff who you're working with more of the preservation backgrounds address those needs more specifically when the connection is made to the owner of the object?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question about, Danielle, what can you tell us about the funding sources for your work? And is this a government subsidies institution, Imagine I See? Or do you find yourself looking for sponsors and other funders?
No, we're subsidized by the City of Amsterdam. Which is a 4-year circle. So every 4 years you make your business plan and then you either in or out, basically. And we just heard that we are in again for the next 4 years. So we're very happy with that.
Congratulations.
Yes. And that actually covers the basic. That covers that we have the office and that we have our staff. And then for every project that we do, we apply for additional funding. Sponsoring in our case is difficult, and it has to do with maybe also the topics that we do. They sometimes find that we are maybe too activistic. So maybe we are, as an institution, a little bit too political, and therefore it's more difficult also to find sponsors for that.
Yeah, sure. Michelle, hi Michelle, has a question, but this may be a question that we need to follow up with her and all of the participants, in fact, after the webinar. And that is, Danielle, do you have any kind of written toolkit or guidelines on how to do a project that you would be willing to share with the participants today? Maybe you can take some time to think about if there are best practices or sort of rules that you try to stick by when you begin a project, and maybe those would be things that you could share with participants as a resource document later. We can email about that if you're willing.
I think it's a great question, and I think I would love to say yes, but at the moment the answer is still no. But it is something that I know and is on my mind that we should work on, because but as said, we are a very small team, so time is always our biggest enemy with everything. And I've been doing this now for 7 years, and I've been developing these thoughts now, and I think it's about time that I put some things on paper. So I do share a lot I do a lot of presentations like this, and I'm always very open to share, but at the moment I have nothing on paper yet. But if there's enough participants to push me, maybe this will just give me the final nudge to do it.
Sure. Well, that's your cue, everyone. Send me an email if you're interested. And I'll be in touch with you, Danielle, later anyway about some follow-up items. So certainly if folks are interested in any portion of your presentation or more information, I would be happy to send those questions your way, Danielle. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So another question is, I would really appreciate and like to learn more about monuments of the mind concept, bringing community together. And maybe you have some comments about if you can share about how you contribute ideas during change.
Is this in connection to monuments of the mind?
Yeah. Maybe you could start out by explaining that concept a little bit more for us.
When I started, when we got the news that the garage was on the list for being demolished, and we knew that there were a lot of people that had special feelings to that monument, or not, it was not an official monument to that building. I actually started to collect all their stories, and what I did is I created, and I showed that in the slide as well, an exhibition, and it was basically just a brown box, and what you could see was the print of the original design of the garage. And for me, the monument of the mind was something that I was creating, putting the audio on top of this box, and therefore I was filling this building that you would normally just walk past, but I was filling it with all these different feelings and emotions, that the personal feelings and emotions that people had. And I was creating, in that sense, a monument of the mind. And that actually sparked the idea of how can you develop something like that further if something is no longer there. So how can you then still give it a place? And that is actually what we have tried to do with collecting both physical objects, but also making a film and creating a book. And is maybe the collection of the different outputs that we have, is that now the monument of the mind of that parking garage. And this is, again, this is a concept that I started working on 2 years, and I would like to develop this more further, how concepts like a monument of the mind could be realized in different ways, and what kind of questions do you put then to something like that.
Thank you. Tamara, thank you for the comment about addressing how you dealt with an exhibit in Indianapolis. And I don't know if you can all see this in the chat box, but Tamara offered, I worked in a museum that had a lot of exhibits with the majority of community-loaned objects. It did require a different sort of thinking, especially when it came to the exhibit process. We had to be very nimble and flexible from beginning to end. One of the things that we did to help with the drop-off and pickup procedure was to have one person who focused on the communication, paperwork, and logistics of receiving and returning the objects, and a team that worked with the physical exhibition processes.
Yeah, I think for us that's Jules. So he's the go-to. So then it's also clear for the people who to go to if they have questions. There's another thing, and I would be, if I can have a little counter question, maybe also to Tamara, but just as a general idea, or just also to mention it. When we put objects of participants in in the exhibition, they are also part of the writing process of the label texts. So the label texts are not my texts. So I will write the introduction text to give the framing of, from my head, what the idea was of the exhibition, but the actual label text with the objects, they're part of the interviews that we take with the participants, and before I actually print them, they go to the participant and we ask them, are you okay with this? Because this is what you said. So we really find it important that they know, and they have a say in how it's shown and what kind of texts are shown with it as well.
Great. So the black screen I'm hearing is back up. Emma, if possible, would you please try and get our emails back on the screen so that folks can send us a note if they want to talk to us later?
I can try share that again, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Can you see that now?
I can see it. I understand, yeah, the black screen with our little faces is a little distracting. But in the end here, we want you to know basically that if you have questions that you would like to ask of Danielle or of Emma and myself at the center, we are happy to correspond with you via email. Emma's email address is eziraldo, ZIRALDO, @ccaha.org. And I am S. Bailey, so SBAILEY, @ccaha.org. And Danielle, would you like to tell us the website address for Imagine IC so that we can look a little bit more at your projects?
Yes, that's imagineic.nl. I can put it in the link in the
box. Yeah, that'd be great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We had agreed before developing this webinar. In fact, you know, so much has changed in current events, even since we started talking about doing a webinar like this, Danielle. I have one last question for you. I can't help but ask. So when you are engaged in work that is showcasing and engaging with artifacts of current events, and the current events are shifting constantly. The political and social climates are totally changing. How do you maintain your sanity and your ease with your work as so much of the environment can be shifting very quickly?
I think because we are, we don't act on every shift that is happening. And we also know, because as said, a lot of the themes are coming from our participants. And they're also not constantly of every change then knocking our door and saying, this is something that you have to do. So we take really time with our topics, and this is also, I didn't mention to you, I was asked to participate in collecting the city for COVID. Yeah. And I decided that I was struggling with so many ethical questions about the collecting process in a situation like this, that I didn't want to do it on the spot. And one of the reasons was that I knew that a lot of the people that from our communities, they are not online. So set up online collecting projects will not reach them. They had other things on their mind. They were in survival mode. So I really wanted to engage with them in a different way, which was not then translate into output for us as look at us organizations, this is what we are doing. So we did a lot of things basically behind the scene. So we had conversations, we did radio, we used local radio to reach out to the people and just made sure that we stayed in contact with them instead of thinking we should collect this now. But that was our choice, and that was also fueled by the ethical dilemmas that I had in my head. But I also understand the importance of what is happening now, that there is a need to also collect that. And in the past months, I had a lot of conversations with different colleagues about it. And the only thing I would like to say, if you do it, try to think about the ethical dilemmas and try to do it as mindful as possible, and not rush it too much. Because it's very easy in the rush to either oversee the dangers you're putting your own colleagues in by sending them into the street to collect, to the whole that you are not collecting stories from people because they're not at that moment in your network. So you're missing out on their story. So what you're then collecting and presenting and representing is just part, which is also okay, but then be transparent about that.
Thank you. I was hoping you would share some of the insight as to how you approached the COVID collecting. Thank you, Danielle. I'm going to bring the session to a close by saying how grateful we are that you've shared not only your projects, but the considerations that you value along the way during their development. And it was really a pleasure to bridge our communities, which are distances apart, just great distances apart this morning, and for you this evening, going on this evening. So thank you. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for connecting us in this way. Thank you to all of the participants for logging in to the webinar today. Please don't hesitate to contact Emma or myself with any further questions, and good day to you all. Thank you.